Mercedes and Red Bull are now under full FIA investigation, after using a legal trick that gave them up to 136 extra horsepower, exactly where qualifying laps are won. That's not just an advantage. That's control of the grid. And for 3 races, nobody stopped it. No penalties. No warnings. Nothing. Because technically, it didn't break the rules. But here's what changed everything. The FIA didn't just ban the trick. They started asking why it worked. And that's when this stopped being clever and started becoming a problem. Because this wasn't just about going faster. It was about manipulating a safety system at the most critical moment of the lap. And now, they're not just shutting it down. They're investigating it. Deeply. Because if what they find confirms intent, this doesn't just disappear quietly. It could change results. It could change the championship. And it could expose something much bigger happening inside Formula One right now. Because once the FIA started investigating, everything changed. This is no longer about a clever trick. It's about a pattern. A repeatable, engineered behavior that shows up in the data every single time. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because in Formula One, randomness is normal. Systems fluctuate. Energy levels vary. Nothing looks identical lap after lap. But this was identical. Perfectly timed shutdowns at the exact same point on track. Right before the finish line. Every time. And that's where suspicion turns into something else. Because that level of precision doesn't come from the driver. It comes from the system. From software. From something designed to behave that way. And once the FIA sees that, they stop asking what happened. They start asking who designed it. Now think about what that means. This isn't a button pressed too early. This isn't a mistake. This is a coordinated strategy. Built into the car. Tested in simulations. Refined over multiple sessions. And executed under pressure. And that's why the investigation goes deeper. Because the FIA isn't just looking at laps anymore. They're looking at the entire process behind those laps. How the system was programmed. How the energy deployment was mapped. How the shutdown was triggered at the perfect moment. And most importantly, whether it was intentional. Because if it was, then this stops being a loophole. And starts becoming a manipulation of something much more sensitive. A safety system. One that was designed to protect drivers. Not to create performance. And that's where the line becomes very clear. Because Formula One allows innovation. It rewards creativity. But when safety is involved, there is no gray area. And that's exactly why Mercedes and Red Bull are now in a difficult position. Because if the FIA confirms intent, the consequences go far beyond removing the advantage. We're talking about potential penalties. Lap times under review. Sessions questioned. And in the worst case, results that could be re-examined. And that's something no team can ignore. Because now, this isn't just about being fast. It's about being exposed. And once that happens, everything starts to shift. Inside the paddock. Inside the championship. And especially, inside the minds of the teams watching all of this unfold. And this is where the situation becomes something Formula One rarely sees. Because once an investigation reaches this level, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. Across teams. Across races. Across the entire championship. Because now, every result from those first 3 races is being looked at differently. Not officially changed, not yet. But questioned. Quietly. Internally. Because if this system was used consistently, then those final tenths of a second were never truly neutral. They were influenced. Engineered. Placed exactly where they would have maximum impact. And that creates a chain reaction. Because 1/10 in qualifying doesn't just affect the grid. It affects everything that comes after. Track position. Strategy. Clean air. Tire life. Race outcome. So now, the FIA isn't just looking at the trick. They're looking at its consequences. What did it change? Who did it benefit? How much did it really affect the order? And those questions are far more complicated. Because you can't simply remove a tenth from a lap and rewrite history. Formula One doesn't work like that. Everything is connected. Everything builds on what came before. And that's why this investigation is so delicate. Because the FIA has to decide something very carefully. Do they treat this as a closed chapter? Or do they go back and reopen what already happened? And that decision changes everything. Because if they go deeper, if they start reviewing past sessions in detail, then no result is completely safe. Not pole positions. Not podiums. Not even the early championship standings. And that creates tension. Real tension. Because now, teams are not just watching the track. They're watching the FIA. Waiting. For a decision that could shift the entire narrative of the season. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. While some teams are under pressure, others are ready. Because if anything changes, if any advantage is officially questioned, if any result is even slightly adjusted, then the entire balance of power can move overnight. And that's why this moment is bigger than it looks. Because this isn't just about Mercedes. It's not just about Red Bull. It's about the integrity of the competition itself. About where the line really is between innovation and exploitation. And once that line is defined, every team will adapt to it. Every engineer will rethink their approach. Every future idea will be shaped by this exact moment. So as the investigation continues, there's one question building more and more pressure. Not just inside the FIA, but across the entire paddock. How far did this really go? And what happens if the answer is bigger than anyone expects? And this is where the pressure reaches its peak. Because at some point, the FIA has to decide, not just what happened, but what it means. And that decision is what everyone is waiting for. Because if the FIA concludes this was simply a clever interpretation, then the story ends quietly. The trick is gone. The loophole is closed. And Mercedes and Red Bull move on, with their reputation intact. But if the FIA decides something else, if they believe this crossed into deliberate exploitation of a safety system, then everything changes. Because now, it's no longer about innovation. It becomes a precedent. A warning to every team on the grid. That there is a limit, even if the rules don't clearly define it. And that's where the real consequences begin. Not just for those two teams, but for the entire sport. Because from that moment on, every engineer has to think differently. Every idea becomes a risk calculation. Every advantage is questioned before it's even used. Because now, it's not enough to be legal. You also have to be safe, predictable, acceptable. And that's a much tighter boundary. A much more dangerous one. Because it's not written clearly anywhere. It's interpreted, case by case, moment by moment. And that uncertainty changes everything. Because Formula One has always been about pushing limits. Finding the edge. Operating right on the line between what is allowed and what isn't. But now, that line has shifted. It's no longer just technical. It's philosophical. And that's much harder to navigate. Because you don't know exactly where it is until you cross it. And by then, it's already too late. So as the FIA prepares to deliver its final position, every team is watching. Not just for the outcome, but for the message behind it. Because whatever happens next will define how Formula One evolves from here. What is possible? What is acceptable? And how far teams are willing to go in the pursuit of performance. And that leads to the final realization. This investigation was never just about a trick. It was about the boundaries of the sport itself. And now, those boundaries are about to be redrawn. Not with new rules, but with a new understanding. And once that happens, everything that comes next will be different. And this is where the story reaches its final and most important point. Because after everything, the trick, the ban, the investigation, what actually matters is what this reveals. Not about Mercedes, not about Red Bull, but about Formula One itself. Because this situation exposed something most people never see. How fragile performance really is. How a gain of just 1/10 of a second, a detail hidden in the final meters of a lap, can reshape an entire grid, can influence results, can decide who starts first and who is forced to fight through traffic. And once you understand that, you understand something much deeper. Formula One is not just about speed. It's about timing, precision, and finding opportunities where no one else is looking. And that's exactly what happened here. A safety rule became performance. A penalty became irrelevant. A legal system became too powerful to ignore. And in the end, it wasn't removed because it was illegal. It was removed because it revealed a weakness. A flaw in how the rules interact with reality. And that's what the FIA had to correct. Not by rewriting everything, but by drawing a line. A line that wasn't visible before, but is very clear now. And that changes the future of the sport. Because from this moment on, every team knows something they didn't know before. That even if something is legal, even if it works perfectly, even if it gives a decisive advantage, it can still be taken away. If it goes too far, if it creates risk, if it changes the nature of competition itself. And that realization is what stays long after the trick is gone. Because now, every engineer will think differently. Every system will be questioned. Every innovation tested not just for performance, but for consequence. And that's what makes this moment so important. Because it doesn't just end a story. It starts a new one. A new phase of Formula One. Where the limits are no longer just written in the rules, but defined by how far you can go before someone decides it's too far. And that brings everything back to one final question. The one that defines this entire story. In a sport where every thousandth matters, where every advantage can decide a championship, where is the real limit? And more importantly, who will be the next team to find it? And that's where the story refuses to end. Because just when it feels like everything has been exposed, something else starts to emerge. A new layer. A deeper reality. Because while everyone is focused on what was found, very few are asking what this allows. What this opens. What this quietly tells every single team on the grid. Because now, the message is clear. The rules are not the limit. Understanding them is. And that changes the entire mindset of Formula One. Because from this moment forward, it's no longer enough to be fast. It's not even enough to be innovative. You have to be invisible, precise, calculated in a way that doesn't just gain performance, but avoids attention. Because attention is what kills advantages. Not illegality. Not failure. Visibility. And that is the real shift happening right now. Because the FIA didn't just stop a trick. They revealed how they will react when something goes too far. Not instantly. Not aggressively. But strategically. By watching. By analyzing. By waiting for the moment where intent becomes undeniable. And once that happens, everything collapses. Just like it did here. And that forces every team into a new kind of game. A quieter one. A more dangerous one. Because now, the goal is not just to find performance. It's to hide it in plain sight. To make it look natural. Unintentional. Almost accidental. And that's much harder. Because now, you're not just competing against other teams. You're competing against detection. Against interpretation. Against the moment where your idea becomes too obvious to ignore. And that's where Formula One becomes something else entirely. Not just a sport. Not just engineering. But a constant battle between innovation and exposure. And that's why this story matters so much. Because it shows exactly how that battle works. How something brilliant can exist, dominate, and then disappear the moment it's understood. And that cycle never stops. So while Miami gives us answers, while the grid resets, while the truth finally shows itself, there is something else already happening. Quietly, somewhere in the background. Another idea. Another interpretation. Another detail waiting to be discovered. Waiting to become the next advantage. The next controversy. The next moment where everything changes again. Because in Formula One, it always does.